movement of self-determination where individual self-advocates want more control of their lives. They want to direct their services. They want to be the employer of their services. This waiver is really a lot of where the nation is going and really allowing people a lot of opportunities to direct their services and their choice of services. So this waiver first originally was going to be for just kids with autism. But we expanded it because we see that we are really serving a lot of individuals that have specific needs that really were not a Medicaid-covered service under our other two waivers. And that being a lot of the population also with dual diagnosis. I can tell you if I'm sitting in this room, is there anybody that's not Lucas County in this room? What county? Wood. Wood? Putnam. Putnam? Okay. And Henry. Okay. That's wonderful. I love to see so many counties coming together. You've got kind of a little region right here in this room. What's really important, if I were sitting in here, you know, you can hear a whole presentation. You got the waiting list handbook. You can be sitting there with your waiting list handbook, but what does it mean? You know, my county isn't really going to request any of these waivers from the state. I'm just going to still sit there on that same place on the waiting list. So I'm going to really get into that a little bit more in detail as we move forward. But I want you to kind of think about that. You know, how are you having conversations? I said we have a statewide family advisory council. I really am a person who strongly believes in local engagement. How are you having conversation with your local county board to even know that this waiver is coming about? Hey, county board, are you requesting some of these slots from the state that I even know that I might have an opportunity within the next 5 years? You know, how aggressively are you going to go after those basic dollars? And you will also hear me talk about, I also understand the dynamics of the challenges that the county boards have, because they do have to provide nearly 40% of that match, and a lot of them have been leveraged to the max with providing the match on the waivers that they already have. So again, it's having conversation. And maybe, you know, I always look at limited funds or opportunity. We don't create anything new unless we really need to face change. And so how are you partnering in that conversation and doing some creative things locally? I think it takes that local engagement and how you're doing that. Okay, first of all, so who is eligible? That'd be one of the first questions I'd want to know. Is my son or daughter even eligible for this waiver? Tell me what it means. First of all, you have to have developmental disability. You have to be Medicaid eligible, as Gary just talked about what it is to be Medicaid eligible. And I do want to stop on the being Medicaid eligible because I was being courteous and not jumping. No, jump in. And one of the myths out there, and I actually had a professional call me the other day, and they were doing an interview of somebody that of a child that was going to be a perfect candidate for the self-waiver. And he called me and he said, well, that child can't possibly get the self-waiver because their family makes too much money. And I was just so saddened because there again is just misinformation of not understanding that you only looked at that child's income, and that's the beauty of the waiver is that waives the parents by being enrolled. Right. So it was just really having that understanding on it.
And make sure, I mean, if your child's social security number is on anything, they know. So check grandma's bottom drawer of her dresser. If she's been buying savings bonds and putting your child's social security number on it, he can be 8 years old and have more than $1,500 in assets, and you don't even know, but they know. And if they know, they don't qualify.
Okay, again, on level of care, Gary touched that. You must have an intermediate care facility level of care to be eligible for this waiver. You must be willing and able to perform duties associated with participant direction. This is a participant direction waiver. I'm going to talk about each one of those services. I hate using words that we don't really explain what they are. Through the presentation you will hear, just as I really hate acronyms, and I tried not to use acronyms other than the SELF because that's a long thing to spell out. That you must, as Gary said, meet the health and welfare needs have to be met, which is your health, keeping your health and safe. Require at least one self-waiver service. Of course you need to need one of those in order to be enrolled. And an individual or guardian representative must be willing and able to perform the responsibilities of participant direction. And I'm going to explain participant direction here in a minute. Okay, so eligibility continued. An applicant shall enroll in the self-waiver with a classification of either you being a a child or being an adult. And those are different service packages in which I will get into more detail. The child is under the age of 22 and being served by the local school district. So if you graduate actually by the age of 18, and 18 being an adult, if you have formally exited from school, then you would be considered an adult. The county board actually really going to request some of these waivers. Well, there's a lot that goes into that process. So first of all, I want you to know that when we first were developing this waiver of being just for children with intense needs, very specific intense needs, they had to meet a certain criteria for that. We approved that we would fund, as Gary said earlier, 60% federal money, 40% local levy dollars. Well, that 40% match for the first 100 waivers is going to be paid for by our department. So out of those 100 waivers, 88 counties, every single county will get one waiver that is slated only for a child who meets the criteria under the specific, which we'll get into in more detail a little bit. So that leaves 12. Anybody do the math? Okay, they get 88. Who's going to get that extra 12? Gosh, can Lucas County get all those extra 12? It's based on a formula, and it's county tax equity formula, and I'm not sure exactly who those are slated to yet. So the 100 children that will be selected, they must complete our department intense behavioral checklist. Now for those counties, let's say that here in Lucas County, I get the one fully funded, and I have a lot of families who ask this question because then are they going to only make requests of additional waivers? Will they just be for adults or will they be for kids? That is not our decision to make. It is a local policy decision. It's their discretionary dollars. We don't get to dictate where they go. So if they choose that they go to children, then they don't even have to do our checklist because we're not paying the match. They'll have their own specific criteria for that. Okay, self-waiver service package. This is really important to know what services are there because this waiver may not really be the waiver for me. You know, when I get a lot of calls in the department and I hear from individuals or families who say, I need a waiver, I need a waiver. The first question is, from me, why do you think you need a waiver? And typically, they don't really need what they're asking for because that may not even be one of the covered services. Waivers in our service system should always be based on people's needs and making sure that those covered services are going to address your specific need, or it isn't going to be really good. So really understanding what those are. With children, there's a cost cap. Like in our level 1 waiver, there's a cost cap of $5,000. And then on our IO waiver, there's an aggregate cost cap that can go all the way up to $500,000. Gary and I have been around a long time. We call them, if you kind of think about it, we got your level 1. This is kind of a middle of the road waiver. This is affordable. This is a good waiver for boards because they can be more fiscal responsible of really working their budget because it has a hard cap. For the IO waiver, which I call the Mercedes, I used to call it Cadillac, but now I've moved it on that to Mercedes. It is very difficult for a county board to budget because it has an aggregate cost cap. People can go up and down quite a bit, and it's hard to budget. So this is kind of middle of the road. So for kids, it's a hard cost cap of $25,000, and I wanted you to understand in that $25,000 how that all works, because some of the services that are covered in that waiver will have a service limitation. An example, and when you see these words up here, they may not make a lot of sense to you. I'm going to go into those in more detail. Annual limitation of $8,000 is for the support broker. I'm going to talk about a support broker. Annual service limitation of $1,500 is for that functional behavioral assessment. That would be like about those kids really needing to have that assessment to find out if they even meet the criteria and the specific needs that they have. And then the remaining services that are covered under this waiver don't have any cost cap limitations. So you could use up to the $25,000 on it. As community inclusion, which we'll talk about, participant-directed goods and services, participant family stability assistance, that's really for only individuals that live within the family home. I will talk more detail. Clinical therapeutic intervention, residential and community respite, and remote monitoring. I still hear more from family members that the #1 service people need, respite. I could manage to keep my child at home a little bit longer if I could just get a break here and there. Really important. Self-waiver service package and financial limitations. This is for the adults. The adults is different. You have the kids being a $25,000 cap. Adults are $40,000 cap. But I really want you to understand this because I'm a parent who has a child who has need of day services, employment services, but also residential because she doesn't live at home and she requires 24 hours, 7 days a week. I want you to understand how you can really purchase those services when you're talking about a hard cap of $40,000. If I'm sitting in that audience, I'm thinking we all have plans, we all have ideals of where we want to see our kids as they transition into adult life. And at some point where we phase ourselves out and allow them to be the adults and provide as much independence as we possibly can for them. So thinking about that, will the dollars be able to cover what your dream is? And how can you make that dream really become a reality? If it even means sharing services to make it happen. And we'll get into detail. Annual service limitation, again, is the same as the kids of the $8,000 for a support broker, $1,500. I'm not going to go into that because it's the same. Annual service limitation, $5,000 for remote monitoring equipment. And then any combination, again, of the below has to fit within $25,000 annually. The remaining services have no annual service limitation other than the cap of $40,000. That is your participant-directed goods and services. And then all of we are really focusing on, it's the governor's initiative, we're Employment First initiatives. So we really, this waiver is really designed to really address a lot of the employment needs of our adults today. That's integrated employment, clinical therapeutic intervention, adult day support, vocational habilitation, supported employment enclave, non-medical transportation. There's another thing. To be the best advocates for your sons and daughters, I really think you have an opportunity today because of the internet. And I swore I was never going to get techie. I even got an iPhone because you just have to in today's world. And one of the things I really encourage you to do is get onto our website, and our website address is on every one of these handouts. Because you've got to educate yourselves. You know, I can't be the best advocate for everybody in the state, but my job, how I see it, is to make sure that you have the tools to be the best advocate for your sons and daughters by educating yourselves. On our home page, right on the homepage is a little area to the left, and it has a list of what the website entails. And click on handbooks and publications. Most of those handbooks were written by family members, so they are easy to understand just as much like the self-waiver one you have. And one of them, I would really encourage you to look at W is for waiver, just to really understand like what Gary talked about, the way of Medicaid. And all of the handbooks there start there. That might help provide you a little bit of education that is more geared to your specific need. Okay, so you talk about this participant direction. What does it mean? This is one of the services that you must be able to perform in order to even be enrolled on this waiver. So what is it that I must perform? Participant direction means that individuals have the authority, and that's what makes this self-directed. They have the authority to make decisions about their waiver services and accept responsibility for taking a direct role in managing those services. Everyone on this waiver will be required to engage in the participant direction. And there's two components to that on the self-waiver. Budget authority, that means that I must make the decisions. I have all the authority of how my budget is going to look. I know that I have $25,000 on a capped waiver, how those services and how I control the budget with that. And then employer authority. I get to choose who works with me. I can fire and hire those individuals. And then the individual may choose one or both of those. So what services are covered? We talked about the limitations, so pretty much that's, you have a general idea of what those are. The support brokerage, community inclusion. I'm not going to read them. You can read for yourself there. I'm not going to take the time to do that part. And then all of the employment services, which we talked about. Understanding that Medicaid state plan services must be used before any waiver service can be billed. So again, that medical card, that state plan services, and a lot of what Gary talked about and what's in his handout, must first use that before we can bill a waiver. Gary and I get the calls quite a bit of, how do I get on a waiting list? Where's my county board's waiting list? How do I know if I'm even waiting for the self-waiver? How do I get one? Okay, understanding the application process for the self-waiver is the same as it is today for the IO and level 1. You all were given the handbook of the waiting list. The only thing that has changed in that rule is that we used to have separate waiting lists. So you apply for a level 1 waiver. First of all, let me back up. Does everybody in this room have a service support administrator, which is a case manager for your son or daughter? Because if you don't, then who are you speaking to at the county board level, even if it's just that intake person, as long as you have and know who to contact to make sure that you have placed your sons and daughters on a waiting list. So if you had the level 1 waiver and the individual options waiver, you had 2 separate waiting lists. What we did under the new rule is we combined the community-based waivers all onto one waiting list. Well, for me, I would probably sit there and think, why am I under just one waiting list? I don't want that waiver. I want only this one waiver. So county boards will also have kind of their own subcategory on how they, that's, what waiver is going to best address your needs. Then Gary and I would have, well, let me back up before I digress too much. If you had your level 1 waiting list and your IO waiver waiting list, to apply for the self-waiver, it's not going to be a separate waiting list. You're already on it. Now, because you're already on it, I am a person who doesn't trust anything without sitting down personally and having a conversation with that caseworker or with someone. I went to this presentation and Peggy, Martin, Gary up there told me that I'm already on it. But now you're telling me you don't know where I am on it. So really understanding your application date, whichever waiver you requested first, that original application date is the date that is used for any waiver. So it will still be the same date as the self-waiver. But you need to have a conversation based on your needs, and your SSA kind of knows what you really want and what is best going to address your sons and daughters' needs. Okay, so you need to make the request with your local county board. Then Gary and I will have a lot of, because we talk quite a bit, and we get a lot of the same constituent concerns. And we have a lot of individuals or family members who will call me and say, when we just had the 2 administered waivers of the level 1 and the IO, they'll say, well, I really don't want this level 1 waiver that was offered to me. I've been waiting for the IO waiver. Should I take it or what? As an advocate, I personally could not ever stand up here and say turn down a waiver. If a waiver is offered to you, I don't know if your belief the same. If a waiver is offered to you, I would encourage you to do it because once you're enrolled on a waiver, if it does not address your health and safety, then it gives you an opportunity to be in the Medicaid system where you get a fair hearing to be able to have that discussion. But then if you have individuals who are on the level 1 waiver or an IO waiver today, who make a decision to take the self-waiver, first of all, I do not want them making that decision unless they're really well informed and understand what it means to change from one waiver to another, to sit down and really have a conversation about the future of what your hopes and dreams are for your sons and daughters, to know that it will be there for their lifespan. Circumstances change all the time. We can't predict circumstances. So how you sit down and really have a good, educated conversation before even making some of those decisions. So if I go ahead and I think, no, I want to be self-directed, I want to have the authority, I want to be over control of my life, I really want this self-waiver, I'm going to disenroll from the IO waiver to accept the self-waiver. If you should make that decision, you have up to 180 days. If it does not work, you can go back to your original waiver within that 180 days. So if you decide at 181 days it doesn't work, I'm sorry, you're just out of luck. So you've got to really make sure you understand what that means.